I welcome Pujya Aksharatith Swamiji and Pujya Paritosh Swami to the conference. I feel quite honored to introduce Pujya Aksharatith Swamiji. Swamiji was born in Africa and raised in Chicago. A renowned orator, Swamiji is well versed in the fields of politics, psychology, and the Hindu scriptures. He had taken sainthood Diksha in 2014. In India, he has undertaken measures to care for the children under the aegis of BAPS Hindu Mandir. For the last 5 years, Swamiji's activities are based in the UAE, where he has taken care of the mandir construction, public relations, and media. With immense pleasure, I welcome Pujya Aksharatith Swamiji for the inaugural address.
Something else? Harihi Om Dyohu Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prathavi Shantihi Shantirapah Shantihi Vanaspatayah Shantihi Vishwadevaha Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Happy New Year, everybody. We're happy to see you all, and we thank the organizers for getting all of us together on this special New Year's Day. We have heard the very wise words of His grace, and He has set the stage for why we have all gathered. We have gathered to discuss, to learn from each other, to hear how we may all move forward on the path of happiness. Every person, even if you strip away every difference, has one thing that is common. Each of us wishes for happiness. We may define that differently, but each of us wishes for happiness. That's the one thing all of us have in common. And what is interesting is that when we read scripture, whether that be Hindu scripture, or whether that be Christian scripture, or it be any other scripture, you see God's effort to give us happiness. You see God work to give us happiness. You see God putting our happiness at a priority. Before coming before you today, it is of course my responsibility to engage the Bible before I speak before you. And engaging the Bible and reading Genesis, as we were discussing earlier, we see that throughout Genesis, throughout creation, we said repeatedly, God sees that this was good, and this was good. In the creation of man, after the creation of man, God chooses where to place man. He places him in the best of paradise. He says, I've created all of these trees and fruits for you to consume. I have given you all of these livestock in creation for you to rule over, and so that they may support you in your existence. And then in the narrative version, he says that he sees that man is alone, and so he also creates a companion for man. All of this creation, which for God, in a philosophical way, is very easy, but nonetheless it was an effort, a purusharth, a prayatna, and that was taken by God for our happiness. Even when the great floods are coming, and He is the cause of the floods, He is the one who inspires the ark. Noah could never imagine that such a flood would exist. Noah could not know how to build such an ark, but he inspires the ark, and he instructs precisely what to do so that the continuation of creation may go on and that the people of his covenant may be happy. In our scripture tradition in the Vachanamrit, in Gadra section 1, number 74, Bhagwan Swaminarayan tells his followers, he says, whether happiness comes or sadness comes, whether good things come or bad things come, you should never allow your happiness to go away. One of the sadhus seated in the audience, he says to Bhagwan Swaminarayan that yes, sometimes we lose our balance. Sometimes we become upset. But we become upset because we see that wrong is happening to the devotees of God. That wrong is happening to the fellowship of God. And justified by that, we feel upset. And to that even Bhagwan Swaminarayan says that whether this fellowship grows or falls, you should not let that even erase a little bit of your happiness. Now imagine two traditions, but in both traditions God Himself is saying that He cares for our happiness. And what I feel is important, especially when we're here on New Year's Day, when a new year is beginning, it is a moment for reflection and contemplation. That do we value our own happiness to the same degree that God values our happiness? Think over the last 1 year, the post-pandemic year, how many times you got angry? How many times you got angry? Just remember a couple of them. One may have just been this morning because somebody was late, right? Or it might have been yesterday at work when somebody said something to you they shouldn't have, right? Think of why you got angry. On this New Year's Day, for a second, remember when you got upset. In the last 1 year, when did you cry? Whether that is knowingly outside or hiddenly inside, when did you cry? And ask yourself, why in that moment we gave up our happiness? Ask yourself, is our happiness less important than somebody's dress or somebody's shoes? Is our happiness less important than our own ego? Is our happiness less important than money? Is our happiness less important than possessions? God creates the universe for our happiness. God inspires us for our happiness. He values our happiness. He gives us freedom, as St. Augustine famously says. He gives us freedom because in freedom there is justice and love. If you do not have freedom, then you cannot choose. And if you cannot choose, then there is no justice. And a world without justice would not be good. If you cannot choose, there cannot be love. And a world without love would not be good. And therefore God gave us free will. He gave us the Garden of Eden in paradise to be happy. And He allowed us the freedom to choose happiness. And we have to ask ourselves, why is it that we do not choose happiness? And when you think of it that way, you will realize, we will all realize, for what things we sacrifice our happiness. And really whether our happiness should be so cheap. Should our happiness be, worth less than a pair of shoes? Should our happiness be worth less than a bit of time? Should our happiness be less worth than a little bit of humility? What is our happiness worth? The next time you have an argument in your house, you have to ask yourself, is my happiness worth more than this argument? It's difficult decisions. Sometimes we have small fights for truth. But let's remember that even in truth there are categories. The truth of God is a great truth, but whether you are right in an argument or somebody else is right in an argument is not a truth worth sacrificing your happiness, right? One day you sit down on your anniversary, and in remembering your wedding anniversary, you have a debate on who said what to whom. And you remember very clearly that I said this and you said that. And let's assume you are correct. You did say that, and they did say the other thing. And in this argument, the person you're arguing with, your wife, she remembers it differently. In that moment, is it the time to fight for the truth of what you said? Is your happiness less important than the truth of who remembers your wedding day correctly? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. That if God can take the time to prioritize our well-being, then why can we not choose happiness for ourselves by sacrificing the things like ego that get in our way? And this really is the message that I think that we should take. That we all want to be attached to something stable. Whether it's the pandemic or not, even if there had been no pandemic, all of us have had problems in our lives, yes? It's not as if before the pandemic life was perfect. The pandemic has become a bit of a scapegoat. Anything that happens, pandemic's fault. Inflation, pandemic. Cost increase, pandemic. Fuel prices, pandemic. Right? Anything goes wrong, pandemic. But our life was not perfect before the pandemic either. And even after this pandemic, problems are going to come. There may not be a flood of biblical proportions, but there are small and large floods happening every year. Our life will never be perfect. Yet in that imperfectness, we can still build the ark of faith by attaching ourselves to something that is stable. Even if you go into the ocean, there are waves as tall as this building. But if you deep dive into that wave, the water is still. Right? The ocean's top layer is very busy, but the bottom layer is very peaceful. Inside of that ocean, when all of that turbulence is going on, all you need to do is anchor your boat to the earth. And you get relative stability. Relative stability. A kite flies in the wind, and the kite is being stripped and torn in every which direction, but the thread attaches itself to a person, and therefore the kite can go into the sky and also return back in peace. The winds in between do not cause it problem. In all the troubles in our life, pandemic or otherwise, we need to seek ourselves the ark of faith, the stability of the Lord. And in every tradition, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or any other tradition, the one thing that takes us away from that stability, and the one thing that takes away our happiness, is ego. If we can simply focus on removing that one thing, our relationship with God becomes more stable, and our happiness becomes more permanent. So on this first day of the new year, I ask all of you to pray with me that the Almighty give us the wisdom and the strength to truly identify that the cause of our suffering is our ego. It is no external place or person. It is no external situation, and that He give us the strength to overcome that ego, to overcome that pride, so that we can join ourselves with Him more strongly and find eternal peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Swamiji.